One of the things I've always enjoyed about having a smart home is when it can take care of tedious chores for me. And while I enjoy having a nice lawn outside, I don't enjoy these weeks when it's 90 degrees out here in Atlanta and I need to go mow the grass. So when Ecovacs offered to send me their A2500 RTK robot mower to test, I was eager to see how it would do. I've been testing it for 3 months now. Has it delivered me the ideal scenario of me kicking back, relaxing, and cracking a cold one while the mower runs and takes care of everything for me? Let's talk about it. I'm going to put some chapters down here at the bottom of the video in case you want to jump around, but I think it's important to talk about the technology that these robot mowers use in order to position themselves in your lawn. The original robot mowers used boundary wires around your yard to determine where to go. So you'd have to go out into the yard and physically run and stake down this boundary wire around the perimeter of your yard and along any flower beds or anything else you didn't want the mower to go into. And from there, the mower would bounce back and forth randomly, kind of like the early robot vacuums, between those wires to determine where to mow. And then it would eventually find its way back to the dock. Now, so one of the newer technologies is called RTK, or real-time kinematic. That's what this A2500 uses. It's a satellite-based technology that basically takes a fixed station and a moving station, in this case the mower, and it takes a set of satellites that both can connect to and beams a signal between both of them and determines the time difference between the two down to very accurate precision so that it can actually locate where that mower is down to the centimeter level, which gives it great accuracy on mapping out your yard. And this also means you don't have to use a wire to physically run around your yard. But it does mean you need line of sight to the sky in order to get those satellite signals to both the stationary station and the moving mower. You can see where this might be a problem. Now, there's some newer technology of recent robot mowers using LiDAR. And this is very much a similar technology to what modern robot vacuums use with that little bump on top of the robot vacuum. This uses a spinning laser to actually send out signals and bounce off of things to determine where the obstacles might be. Now you can see where this is a little tougher to do for a robot mower since there's not any physical walls or anything that might be in your yard to determine where the boundaries are, unlike a house where you have actual walls and doors and things like that. However, there are ones coming out that have this, although it's kind of rare currently. Now, when you look at Ecovac's lineup here in the US, you're going to see 3 models. There's a 1000, which is a single blade RTK based model. There's the A2500 RTK, which is the one that this video is about. It is a dual blade RTK model. And there's the A3000, which is a LiDAR based dual blade model. Now, in this case for the A2500 RTK, it is RTK based model, so you do have that satellite station, but it also has a camera and a LiDAR time of flight sensor on the front that it uses for object detection. But the positioning is solely based off of RTK and a little bit based on the camera determining where the edges of the yards are, we'll talk about here in a little bit. Now, I do want to take a minute to talk about our yard so you understand a little bit better of how I've been testing this mower the past 3 months. We actually have kind of 2 test cases here. The front yard is a very uniform grass. It's nicely grown in. There's, however, no borders or anything around. There's no fence. There's no stone borders around our flower beds. There is a section where there's a nice hill that I've tested the mower on. There's also another section where there's smaller strips of glass. So this is probably a little bit more of a uniform test area. Now our backyard, on the other hand, is treed over, shaded in a lot of areas, very patchy grass, lots of roots, lots of stones, twigs falling from the trees, and even a water hazard because we are on a small lake behind our house. So between the front yard and the backyard, we've had a good variety of tests for this Ecovacs mower. As far as setup goes with the A2500 RTK, you're probably going to want someone's help carrying this to where it needs to go because it is a rather large box. As far as where you're going to position it, you're going to want to put the base station somewhere within Wi-Fi range of your internet for your house. That's probably going to be on the side or the back of your house so it's not sticking out like a sore thumb on the front of your house. Now, as far as what's in the box, it's actually quite simple. There's the main mower unit itself, which comes pre-assembled. There's the base station. There's some anchors for the base station. There's the power cord for the base station. There's a pole for the RTK unit, the RTK receiver itself, and then a cord from the RTK receiver that goes and connects to the base station. Now, securing the base station to the ground is pretty simple. You're going to locate it somewhere along the edge of your yard, and then you'll take the plastic anchors and you'll drive them into the ground through the base station to secure it. I use the power drill, probably not recommended since they are plastic anchors, but they are pretty sturdy. They do include an Allen wrench to go ahead and anchor those into the ground. And from there, you're going to want to plug power into the base station and then plug in the RTK cable to the base station. Now, this is where you might run into your first problem, because as we were talking about on the technology overview part of robot mowers, RTK requires a clean shot to the sky. Now, as you heard talking about my yard a few minutes ago, my backyard is pretty heavily treed and wooded with very tall, mature trees. So it actually took me a few tries to get enough RTK signals. It requires at least 20 satellites to hit signal to both the RTK receiver and the mower. I tried 3 different locations along 3 corners of my house, and none of those had enough signal at first. Now, Ryan from this smart house actually suggested I go up with it, which is a great idea. So I ran the RTK receiver and pole onto my deck, put it there, and finally had enough signal from the satellites to start setting up and mapping my yard. As far as mapping your yard goes in the app, Ecovacs offers 2 options. There's an automatic option and a manual, and you can actually mix those together a little bit. And the way the automatic option is going to work is it's actually going to use the camera on the front of the mower to try to navigate along the boundary of your yard, determining where the grass ends and your flower beds or your concrete or whatever begins. And this actually requires a pretty clear line between the two. And where you do have a clear line between the two, such as our front yard where we have a very well-defined boundary between our driveway and the grass or our grass and the flower beds, this worked pretty well. Now, if the mower messes up or you need to do something manually, you can actually back it up in the app to retrace your steps and then redo that particular section. And the whole time you're going to want to do this following with your phone behind the mower. The automatic option is great where there are those defined boundaries, but anywhere where you have kind of patchy grass or maybe that boundary is a little shaky, you're going to want to go ahead and just stick it in manual mode and map that way. This is especially true for, in our case, the area by our lake, because it could not pick up the good difference between the drop off into our lake and the grass back there. So if you have a sketchy area like that, just go ahead and put it in manual mode, walk behind the mower and use that to do your mapping. After you create your map of your yard, you can then go into the app and divide it up into different areas and sections to divide things up. Now for me, I divided up into my front yard, my side yard, the backyard, and then a separate section just along the lake. And we'll talk about why here in a minute. With the map created and nicely divided up into areas, it's time to start the mowing. Now there's multiple modes you can send the mower off into to run and mow your yard. There's automatic mode, which uses the same setting to run through your entire yard in one go. And there's an areas mode, which then use the individually tailored settings for those areas to run in. That's what I prefer to run the mower in, since our front yard and our backyard is so different. Running off through the front yard, it would go out and nicely start doing a zigzag pattern in the middle of the yard first. Now the pattern and the direction that this goes in is defined in the app. It's based off of the base station and the direction it's facing. It gives you a compass to finally dial in the degree that you want the direction to go to. And then from there, you can also enable a setting to have it go perpendicular every other week. So it'll go this direction one week, and then the following week it'll go 90 degrees from that. So the theory being that it doesn't mat down your grass, always go in the same direction back and forth. That's nice to see. I do wish it was a setting per area instead of global, but it's better than nothing. Now there are settings per area that you can do. There's height settings for what height you want the grass mowed at, which is great for our yard since the front yard is much different than the backyard. There's also a speed setting. In our front yard, I have it on the slower speed setting since it's much denser grass. And with those settings dialed in, I've mostly let the mower run and do its thing in the front yard. It kind of just went out, did its thing without any hiccup. It would take about 1 hour to do the actual mowing of about 2,000 square feet in our front yard. During this phase, it would get about 80% done before it required a top off of the battery. This would take 45 minutes to recharge it from about 15% to 85%. So all in all, you're talking about an hour and 45 minutes to do 2,000 square feet, which I don't consider to be too bad. That's probably helped by the fact this is a dual blade model that has about a 13-inch cutting width. It also did really well climbing the hill in our front yard, so it lives up to its GOAT name. It would scamper up it at a slow speed just fine, and when it needed to come back down, it would also do that just great. That was very nice to see. Now, I would say the coverage of our front yard was about 95%. I would not call it 100% automatic mowing. There would be one random stripe, it seemed like every run, that it would miss. I don't know why, and it wasn't always in the same place, but there was one stripe that it tended to miss. Now, the edge mowing that it would do was actually very impressive to see. It would nicely fall along the edges, especially along our curved flower beds. It would automatically adjust to follow those. But it had a little bit of trouble with kind of the 90-degree corners where it needed to turn through. It wouldn't kind of go off and cut back, and that would leave a little stripe of grass missing on the inside there. So don't quite throw away your weed whacker yet. You have some little touch-up areas. I would say I probably take the weed whacker out every other week and hit those areas. But 95% coverage I don't think is too bad, given I'm not having to be out there the whole time in the 90-degree heat here in Atlanta. Now, we can also talk about the object detection from those sensors that are on the front of the mower. Now, I tested this in a couple ways, in 2 different ways with our hose. So I kind of coiled it up and left the head of the hose out in the yard. It did a perfect job of missing that and avoiding it, which is great to see. I also draped the length of the hose across the yard. This is actually more of an accidental test. I forgot it was out there. And it also picked that up right away and it basically did it cross it. It would just hit it, come up to it, turn around and go back. Now, as far as other things I tested with it, I also tested with things like a Frisbee and different size balls. And these objects I had a little bit more trouble with. The flatter things like a Frisbee, it tended to just plow right over. I don't know if it couldn't detect it because it was so low or what. Smaller balls like golf balls and maybe like a tennis ball size, it also had trouble with. It tended just to go over those. Anything from about a baseball size and bigger, it would detect those perfectly fine and avoid it. So I would say you have to pick up kind of the smaller objects in your yard in order to avoid them from getting run over. Now, as far as how often I had to run it in our front yard where we have that nice dense grass, I would have to run it 3 times a week to keep up with it. And that's because this isn't as much mowing as it is shaving the grass. If you flip the mower over and look at it, there's actually little tiny razor blades that it's doing the mowing with. It's not like the big sturdy blade that's doing mulching and everything on a full-size manual mower. So with that said, you're going to want to run it more often and kind of do that shaving as you're going. And that also said, you're also going to notice that that grass is not getting mulched up like it is a normal mower. It's leaving it there on your yard. So you will end up with kind of stripes of that mowed grass kind of sitting on top that you'll either have to wait for a rain to come in, or in my case, I like to take a blower out there once a week and just blow those grass clippings off into the flower beds. Not too big of a deal, but it is something to consider with how often you run a robot mower, and that's not really anything specific to this Ecovacs GOAT model. That's really going to be a problem with any robot mower. Now, the backyard is a totally different challenge compared to our front yard, since it's a very rough area, very patchy grass, even in the areas that is total dirt and a bunch of weeds, twigs, things like that. So before I even started the mower running back there, I went ahead and went into the mobile app, and for those areas in the backyard, I raised the mower up to a higher setting, usually about 2.5 or 3 inches, so it can clear things like twigs and branches and roots and things like that. I also set it to the higher speed setting since the grass back there is not nearly as dense, and it's a bigger area, hoping it would get the area done quicker. And then I set it off mowing. Now, I will say the very first time we set it off mowing, we had a very close encounter with it falling into the lake. And this is where I discovered the edge mowing settings in the Ecovacs app. There's 3 different levels of settings that you can apply to the robot as a global setting. The first one, is it will stay exactly along the edge of the boundary for your map that you define. The middle one is it gives it kind of a plus minus 7 or 8 inches, where it'll use the camera on the front to try to determine where the edge is. This works great in our front yard. The backyard, not so much, since those edges aren't defined. And the third setting is a basically automatic only, where it only uses the camera on the front and the sensors on the front to determine where those boundaries are, which in our backyard did not work at all, since those boundaries are not very clear. So I highly recommend, if you have an area with patchy grass or anything, you go into the app and check that setting, because the default setting is the one to automatically find that. And if you have a drop off or an area with water, you will not want that to happen. But once I found that setting, adjusted the speed settings, things actually went pretty well. I let the mower run several times, many different directions. And I also went into the app and defined areas where I found the mower was getting stuck a lot. This was things like tree roots, rocks, things like that. Now, when you define these no-go areas for the mower in the app, it's not like a robot vacuum where you can just go onto the app and draw a square or a circle. You actually have to take the mower in a manual mode in their app, drive it over to that area, and outline it while manually controlling the mower like a little remote control car. Not too big of a deal, but I do wish you could actually define and kind of draw those areas in the map if you knew where they were. Once I had all these settings defined in the backyard with the no-go zones, the speed settings, the heights tuned correctly, the mower did a great job of actually handling the rough terrain and the patchy grass and everything back there. It would mostly go off without any issues, and it has been for almost 3 months now, as long as you have a stable RTK signal. And here's where you might run into problems, and it's not because you think. There is one very big bug that I ran into with the Ecovacs mower. I found out that my mower was losing RTK signal whenever it would exit the base station. This was a little hard to figure out what was happening, because it would just randomly happen. It wasn't consistent, but it did happen enough that I'd say about half the time it would leave the base station and end up off in the woods or something, stuck and lost. Come to find out, if you watch the RTK LED when it backs out of the station, that LED would totally turn off because the RTK station was losing power. Come to find out, the RTK station does not actually need to be plugged in to the base station itself. It only uses that for power. And if you buy the GOAT A2500 RTK directly from Ecovacs themselves, instead of off somewhere like Amazon, they actually include this separate power adapter for that RTK station as an accessory. Now, you can also go and buy it yourself. As soon as I plugged in that separate power adapter for the RTK station, that problem was gone, and I almost never had any more RTK issues, and things went flawlessly. So keep that in mind if you are having positioning errors with this A2500 RTK. Now let's talk about some other kind of maintenance or things to keep in mind as you live with a robot vacuum that I've learned over the past 3 months. First of all, things like basic maintenance. As I said before, these mowers use very kind of small razor blades to more shave your yard. And those blades do need to be changed, since they do get worn out. The Ecovacs app will remind you after a certain number of hours when it's time to change those. You can go onto their website and order them and swap them out. Now, obviously, be careful swapping these out, because they are sharp. Wear gloves and protection and things like that, but you can swap them out yourselves. The other thing to keep in mind is these sensors that are on the front of the GOAT that are used to detect objects and things in the way of the mower. Make sure these are clean, because what I discovered is that when it would rain, my base station was near a little bit of a dirt area, kind of a mud area, and the rain would splash dirt up onto those sensors, and they would block it, and the robot would leave the station, kind of spin around in circles because it thought there was objects in front of it. So you want to make sure those sensors are wiped off, especially anytime after it rains, if it's in a kind of a dirt-prone area instead of having mulch or anything else around it. For me, I ended up adding a little bit more mulch around the base station, and that hasn't been a problem since. The other thing to keep in mind is that if you have a rough area, kind of like our backyard is, where the grass isn't perfectly even, or you have patches of dirt and things like that, there is a good chance that a robot mower is going to get stuck. And this is probably universal to any robot mower, not just this GOAT A2500. And when that happens, the mower is going to try to get itself unstuck. And when it does that, it's probably going to be spinning its wheels in one place. And from there, it can kind of dig a little hole into your yard. So that's something to think about. The other thing that's a little weird, and this might be specific to this A2500 RTK from Ecovacs, is the app will detect that the mower is stuck. And then instead of just sitting there waiting for you to come rescue it, it then tries to send itself back to the base station, which is a little odd because it knows it's stuck. Why would it try to go back to the base station instead of, just sitting and waiting to be rescued? And also with this Ecovacs mower, if it does get stuck and you're away from the house, you cannot remotely control it from the app. There is no signal from outside of your home to the app when your app is not within Bluetooth distance of the mower to control it. So keep that in mind if you are wanting to run this while you're away from the home. Now, with all those things in mind, is the Ecovacs GOAT A2500 RTK worth it? I'm actually pretty impressed by it, especially in our front yard where the grass is uniform and it can easily tackle things and it has good RTK signal. It does a great job, and our grass has never looked better out front as it does right now, getting mowed 3 times a week. And I'm not having to go out there and sweat. Now, if we were to have a lawn service come and mow our yard, it would be about $50 every 2 weeks. So call it $100 a month. The Ecovacs A2500 RTK costs anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500. So that's about a 10-month to a 15-month return on investment, which isn't terrible for a robot in this day and age. Where I would have pause is if my yard was heavily treed around it or I'm in the woods where I know I'm going to have trouble getting signal to that RTK station. In that case, you might want to look into the A3000, which is the Ecovacs model that uses LiDAR only and doesn't require that line of sight to the sky. Let me know what you guys think about robot mowers. Do you think it's something you're looking into? Maybe in the future, waiting for the technology to evolve? Like and subscribe and let me know.